on social media. TikTok is her favorite.
Love
She's
it.
even to the point, Jess, when we go somewhere, she's like, "So will there be a TikTok for this?" And I'm like, "Maybe." She's like, "Okay." And then a day or so later, she's like, "So where's the content?" I'm like, "Man, it's not even 24 hours. Can I rest for a second?"
That is so cute.
So yeah, she's into TikTok, and I know I mentioned coming to where you are to like, go back to Europe again, and she was like, "Are you gonna go see Jess?" And I was like, "I mean, if
Yes.
she's
No.
not busy, we can always do lunch." She's like, "Oh," because that was a hint for her, Jess. She was like,
Yeah.
"Okay." I'm like, "You probably want to go, don't you?" So for everyone who is joining the show, as I mentioned before in the intro, I have one of my OG creative friends, Jessica van Dop DeJesus, also lovingly known as Jess. She is someone I've known for, I have stopped counting,
Like
years.
10 years
I
now.
knew her when I worked at, yes, it's been 10 years. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know how we met, but I remember you did something with National Harbor. I think I pitched you
Yeah.
to National Harbor to do a blog post. I remember coming to your book signing, meeting the little boo boo when she was still in your belly, and then when you first gave birth to her. And now she's a whole world
She's a
traveler,
whole
like just growing
person.
up before our eyes. Oh, it's just insane how much she's so much like you, honestly. Like she's adventurous, she's smart. It's just to see a little Jess grow up on social, it's really lovely to see. But she's on my show today, and we're gonna talk about places from plate to places, the intersection of food and travel. Because who else can we have to talk about this but the OG herself, who has been cooking it up on the socials and content since before it became a thing for everyone else to
Yeah.
do. So, to give you your credentials and to read your receipts, we're going to start with your bio. Jessica is a widely published travel, food, and media digital publisher, freelance journalist, and digital media strategist. She is the founder of The Dining Traveler, a multimedia digital platform covering food and travel, and the author of a coffee table book that I still have, The Dining Traveler's Guide to Puerto Rico. Yes, it's one of my favorite books. You can
Thank you.
also find her writing publications such as AFAR, Business Insider, Travel and Leisure, amongst others. She was raised in Puerto Rico and began traveling as a young Marine over 25 years ago. As a digital strategist, she's worked with organizations such as Bunker Labs and the European Union. Follow her on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube at The Dining Traveler. And with that being said, welcome to Coffee with Yvonne, Jessica!
Hello.
Oh, I just had to say, Jess, just following your journey has been such a pleasure. Like you writing a book, I know how much work that took because you shared that journey on social media, but you being a woman of color and the glass ceilings you've broken in the content creator space, I admire you for your work and your tenacity. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so much. And, I actually remember where we first met. You used to work for Montgomery County for the tourism board back in the
Yeah.
day. And we did an event, we did a panel
Mhm.
discussion. And I remember meeting you, and I was like, this girl is going places in like the destination marketing world. I was like, I could see her being like, a CMO, like, yeah, I just loved your whole vibe. I was like, I have to be friends with her.
And I remember you said that, and it's just so interesting because it's always stuck in my mind with everything that I do, how much of an impact those words have been for me in my career journey. Because as you know, Jess, careers aren't linear, right? They can
No.
go in so many different ways. And just knowing that people like you have always supported me has always made me want to think about my craft from not just an expertise level, but an impact level, essentially. Because what we do have impact, right?
And sometimes we don't realize it, but especially, like you said, being women of color and, and being in spaces that, even in the DC area where it's such a Black space, right? Like you would, like when I think of DC, I think like, you know, is a black
Chocolate
space,
City.
right? And
Yeah.
then, and then you also have like a, a big Latino community, mostly from, Central and South America. And then you go to a lot of these media spaces and the stories are not being told, by these people, from a food and, even like the visiting, I think is slowly starting to change a bit more. But when we were coming up 10 years ago, that was not the case. Like, a lot of times we were like the handful of women of color, like, representing the city and, and representing, just the craft of food and travel. So, and, and doing events like in DC, we did women of color travel and these things. And now I see like a lot of other younger women, doing that. And I feel like there's a bigger inventory, of these creators. And it makes me feel so good to see folks out there and getting their dues, right? Like whether it's traditional media or their digital platforms.
Yes, and you're exactly right. And as someone who has traveled around the globe, sharing your travels on your blog, The Dining Traveler, and on social, I just want to know for those who are watching and listening, how do you approach finding authentic food experiences while
The
traveling?
beauty of social media and being able to connect with different people as I'm getting ready to travel. Like, for example, I follow a few people. I was going to Sicily. I'm working in the Fooders travel guide to Sicily in one of the chapters, and yes, and I started following some people from my previous trip to Sicily, and I reached out to them, and I was like, "Hey, I'm working on this guide." And they're like, "Oh, I know somebody. I'm going to connect you with so and so, email so and so, text so and so." So, even using Google Translate and trying to text in Italian. So I try to do those connections on social media. When I'm in the destination, I love asking like the front desk person at the hotel, and I'm like, "Don't tell me what, you're being paid to say, like, where do you like to have drinks after work?" Or sometimes I'm at a restaurant and I'll ask the waiter or server, "Hey, where do you guys go?" Like, I always like to ask just random people, if that conversation is being, established. And I have to say, like, I found some amazing places. Like, I was in Santorini with Carla a few years ago, and we asked the servers, like, where should we go? And he's like, there's this on the other side of the island. It's not as touristy, but there's a vibe. And we went there and we're like, oh, there is a vibe here. So not being afraid to ask people, hey, where do you guys eat?
And that's something I think from watching you on social, I've leaned into when I travel. Like, I do, of course, the top recommendations, but then when I get there, I start asking, like, talking to people. And that's where you find that hole in the wall food spot that has the best insert item on the menu, or you find an undiscovered shop on like a street while you're just wandering. Like, it's a beauty
Yeah,
to wander. Of course, just keeping safety top of mind,
yeah.
but wandering in the cities where you're visiting builds those authentic experiences. And then when people try to mimic that jest, they're like, well, I wasn't able to do that on my travels. And I'm like, did you talk to people or did you just
Mm,
leave and like try to figure it out? Because those are the people who hold the key to the city. It's the locals, not
yeah.
always recommendations on like a hotel list.
Absolutely. And I think also, because when you go to like TripAdvisor, for example, I think in terms obviously of tourist attractions, they have a great list because those obviously locals are not going. I don't go to the Grand Place every week. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, and I literally live like half an hour walking from it, but I'm like, I have a job. I don't go there all the time. But then like the top restaurants at TripAdvisor are going to come from tourists, right? Like they're not coming from locals. So, I love Google Maps as a resource in terms of like restaurants and stuff. Like just like what
Hmm.
restaurants around, what are people commenting on it? And
Hmm.
definitely like for example, I've been living in Brussels on and off for almost 10 years, and I always tell people like in the city center, the Grand Place, beautiful. You should go there. But other, I would say like 80% of the restaurants around that area are trash. Like, within a half a mile radius. Like they all suck. I'm sorry. I mean, like there's like some new things that are popping up, but yeah, it's not, there's a bazillion of tourists. Even if you walk, let's say 20 minutes outside of that city center, you're going to find like more authentic dining experiences. So I would just say like one thing that I've actually started to do is when I travel, also using Google Translate and finding the local publications. So
Mm-hmm.
there's, for example, in Brussels, there's a publication that's actually in Dutch, which I barely speak. My husband is Dutch, but it's called Bruce, and it's like a Washington City paper, like that vibe. It's like I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's like my answer to Washington City paper, kind of like alternative, and they have some great recommendations. And like now when I travel, I'm like, oh, okay. Like when I was going to Sicily, I would do like travel, I would do Google Translate, and it's like, oh, like restaurants, but I would type it in Italian because it would give me a completely different,
Oh.
set of like places like to eat than something that's in English, and just like a different, and then all the articles you can just translate them. Like if you have Chrome, you can immediately translate them to English. So it's just like a little tip that I've started to do like in the last like few years.
I like that. I'm going to hold on to that because for some reason I feel just drawn to Europe so much. I just love it, and I need to expand my countries. We've already talked about, me
Mhm.
possibly coming to Brussels and going to other places. But thinking about food too, everyone has like their destination city or country for food. But you being the expert that you are an expert. What what destinations, lesser known destinations, do you think deserve recognition for like their culinary heritage? What are like your top five?
So for me, like in terms of European cuisine, Belgium, I think that, obviously France, especially Paris, Paris has some fantastic food. I'm not going to take that away from them. But Brussels and Belgium, as in the general, has such a rich culinary tradition. And I feel like it brings a lot of like, French influences, German, like, and they make it their own. And also like they're a country that has a lot of its own produce. So they produce their own cheese, like they produce their own butter, that has like they're like protected by the European Union. They have chickens, like hens that are like different varietals of hens that are like, protected by by like
That is
it's called
so
the
cool.
denomination of origin, like so you can
Yeah.
only say it's that name if it's from that area. And a lot of people don't know that, obviously the beers, the chocolates and things like that. And but beyond like people know beers and chocolates, but then there's this like a whole subset of ingredients that the Belgians produce, like
Mhm.
really great meats, steaks. So I think that Belgium for me, like every day I'm like learning something new in terms of the the culinary. Um, that so for me that is one. Not because I'm being biased, but I feel like Puerto Rico in terms of Latin food. I feel like Mexico gets a lot of love, Peru gets a lot of love, but for me, I mean, obviously being Puerto Rican, I feel like now more and more it's becoming a thing with Puerto Rican food, but I definitely feel like there's still room for for more love, and I think also like I spent when I was in the military, I spent a lot of time in West Africa, like in Senegal and Ghana specifically, and I really enjoyed Ghanaian food. And
Mhm.
I know obviously in the DC area, there's several spots that serve Ghanaian food and West African food. So those are flavors that I actually want to like dive a little bit deeper on and learn how to make. Um, what else? I mean, like, I think a lot of them are, I mean, more regional. So, I mean, I think Italy, a lot of people think just Italian food is pasta. But because I've been spending a lot of time in Sicily, I've really, like, specifically Sicilian food, I'm really into. They just have really fresh, again, fresh produce. And they do so much with so little. Like, I mean, like, they will have
Mhm.
this perfect tuna steak. So in the summers, it's like swordfish season and everything is super seasonal. The eggplant, Yeah, like if you love like fresh fish and produce, like that's definitely a place. Let me see what other place. I mean, I was stationed in Okinawa back in the day, and again, because people always think Japan, Tokyo, but Okinawa is a city, an island south of the mainland Japan, and it traded between China and Japan for many years. So like you'll see like
Okay.
some of those noodle dishes that are like more Chinese, but then you also have like some fresh fish, and so it's like a place, and I think it was like the first place I lived abroad, like that was super foreign to me. So it'll always be near and dear to my heart. I really would love to go back. So I think yeah, for me those are my like underrated food destinations.
You know, the fact that you name countries that are on my list, because Ghana is on my list. One of my friends, I call my little sister in the industry, her family's from Ghana. And I always
Okay.
tell her, I ever go to Ghana, I'm going with you and your family during Dete December, because that's the only way, like, to go. And also, to Japan is another country that is on my list as well.
My
I've
favorite.
heard they have like the food there, I heard is amazing. I also heard, Jess, that they have, on a different topic, great vintage shopping, and I would
Mhm.
love to do that over there, to like really dive into the culture, but also the fashion culture in that
Yes.
country. And then finally, Puerto Rico. You are telling the truth, because when I went to Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, some of the best food I've ever had was in Puerto Rico, and it
Thank
was just
you.
so, it was so fresh. Like, I love plantains. Like, that is one of my favorite things to eat. I love plantains, and I love a good fried fish whole. Like, I'm one of those people, I would
Castillo
eat the
frito.
whole thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that is.
And so when we got there, they expected me, well, two things, Jess. One, they took a look at me. They were trying to figure out, she speaks and understands pretty well. Is she a cousin? So I was like,
Yeah.
no, don't get excited. I'm American.
And
So
we're so diverse that it's like, you can see somebody that is, either like blonde, blue eyes, or somebody that's super dark, and you're just like,
yeah.
are they, aren't, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that this also applies to the rest of the Caribbean too. But I feel like, for us, like our food is, I just did a Puerto Rican cooking class here for a Spanish class. And I was telling them, I was like, our food is our history in a plate, like when you think of the way that um, an unfortunate history, obviously, with the colonization from the Spaniards, and that brought
Hmm.
the enslaved Africans, and then the genocide with the indigenous people. But at the end of the day, like like out of such horror, something beautiful happened. In terms of our culture and our food, and like the plantains coming from Africa, and that's such a big part of our meal. Or the indigenous food, that is juca, which and made its way to Africa, and now it's like
Hmm.
it's a way that it feeds all of West Africa, just because it's such a crop that it's so abundant.
Hmm.
So out of something horrid, something also like our is a history that you can really
I just
taste.
love when I was in Puerto Rico, and it's actually on my list to go back to Puerto Rico and do more of the island and stay longer. But I just love how welcoming the culture was. I love how the food, like you said, it is just so ingrained in who the people of Puerto Rico are on the island. And it's just that welcoming feel. Like, you feel like you're family the moment you
Yeah,
sit down at a restaurant. You're sitting out there, and I know some Americans, mainland Americans, because Puerto Ricans are Americans. Let's clear that up. Some mainland Americans struggle when they go to Puerto Rico. They struggle with the fact that, yes, it is part of the U.S. culture, but the Puerto Rican people speak their language. They speak Spanish, right?
yeah,
So when you're there, you are immersed in Spanish speaking culture. And for some people, they don't know how to handle that. They're like, no, I need someone to speak English to me. I'm thinking, hey, be respectful in the fact that when you're on this island, yes, they are considered U.S. citizens, but you are now immersed in their world, in their culture, and be
exactly.
respectful of that. So don't go there looking for McDonald's in every corner. Try
Mhm.
something different, try some other foods outside of what you're comfortable doing. That's just been my experience traveling to Puerto Rico and really abroad, is being open to trying different dishes and not shutting things down because it doesn't look familiar to me. Because
Exactly.
in that unfamiliarity, Jess, I have discovered foods I would have never thought I would like. I like escargot. One, I
Yeah.
love escargot. Very good. I could eat that on like a nice toasted bread and just, have that all day long. Um, I love plantains. I love jollof rice when it's not too spicy because each country makes theirs different, and you will
Yes.
be humbled over someone's jollof rice so fast because of how spicy it is. And then another thing I'm learning how to do is I love eating fresh fruits in different countries. And I know that sounds strange, but
It
when
just
I,
tastes different.
yes,
It tastes
yes,
like
so
whenever like I went to Colombia, and I have to say, like, that was like the highlight of my trip. Like every morning for breakfast at the hotel, they had this like fresh fruit and in the, in the buffet, and you're just like, yes, like I this just does not taste the same than the US of A. Like, no.
like having a banana, I was like, it's just a banana. Yes, I bit into a banana when I was in, I think it was Italy. We were just walking one morning before we went to go get, I went to go get some coffee. I said, I'll just have a banana. Just, I bit into that banana. I went, I shook my head. But it's just, I think food really connects people. But when it comes to like, my friends now who have kids, and now my friends with kids are starting to travel, right? And for them, it's a struggle to get your kids to try different foods because some of my internet nieces and nephews are in their dino nuggets phase and they're not trying to eat anything
Yeah.
different. For parents traveling with children, what are your recommendations for getting them to learn about local food culture during their travels, especially you being a mom of a
Yeah.
world traveling young adult in training?
I think that for us, like, we started when when she was just like a baby, introducing different flavors. Like, for example, like I would make a lot of, her baby food, but I would do like put a little bit of adobo in her, like, little potatoes, or or she loved it's so funny because when she was like really little, she loved shrimp, and she like does not like shrimp now, but for example, but she loves broccoli. Like she loves any like green vegetable, like broccoli, green, like, but like today, like I made a fried rice and it had like bell peppers. It's like, I don't like the bell peppers, but then she ate the cabbage that was in it, and you're just like, okay, whatever. But I think that at least eat 80% of it. And I think, one, like not putting that pressure on kids, but continuing to expose them. And I think that if you're a picky eater, your kid's also going to be a picky eater, because some parents complain, oh, my kid, and then and I'm like, but I see you eat, and you're not like that much better than your child. So and also we do eat at home a lot, so we cook whenever. So my tagline on TikTok is, I cook to afford my trips. And because eating out is expensive, and yeah, especially back in the States. Like now, like the few times I've been back, I'm like, ah. Like the tip is the price of a meal, like, come on.
Yes.
So I think that she grows up seeing, because Martin, my husband, also loves to cook, so she sees both of us cooking, and then we try to also have a conversation about food. So for example, today we were eating like Peruvian style fried rice, and we're like, oh, like this recipe comes from Peru, or like we'll eat something else. It's like, oh, like that, like a curry, like that comes from India. So we just try to like also factor like a conversation there. Or she loves Colombian empanadas. There's like a little Colombian store where I get like all my Caribbean ingredients, and they have these delicious Colombian empanadas, and my daughter loves them. And I'm like, oh, when you were a baby, you went to Colombia. It was like the first place, in South America and only place in South America that you've been to. So it's just like working in those little stories, and making it interesting, because I think that kids are super curious, right? And if you engage them, like, and they start talking and they start asking questions, and I think that that's the main thing, in terms of people that and maybe I mean, I only have one child. I bet if I would have had a second kid, they would have hated everything I made for now. You know how it is. Like you meet two people, and you're. I mean, because I think you're an only child as well, right,
Yeah,
Yvonne?
on my
Yeah.
mom's side, yeah.
But for example, my husband and my brother-in-law, like he is my husband will eat anything in front of him. Like he, that's like one of the reasons I fell in love with him. Like this man will try anything once. Whereas his brother is like, a chicken and rice type of dude. Like, that is so you just yeah, like so you just don't know. But I think that the main thing is exposure, right?
Mhm,
Exposing, and also I don't shun, like if she tries something and she's like, oh, I don't like it. I'm like, okay, like, but at least you tried it. And then
mhm,
like and there's been times that she hasn't liked something and then she'll see it again and she's like, oh, okay, like now let me give it a try. And then she likes it. So
mhm,
I think that most of it is exposure and, and secondly, like traveling with kids. I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter and I was having this conversation with my cousins, and he doesn't travel internationally, but what he does a lot of, he follows like college football, like
mhm.
all around the States. And, but when his daughter was born, he was like, I would just put her in the car and we would go like on, she was like a baby and we would go like on these 10-hour car rides following these games. And he was like, it was really uncomfortable at first, but then you get used to it. And then and I think that yeah, like when you're like that first flight, second flight with a baby and you're carrying all this shit with you and you're just or a road trip and you're like, oh my God, I have to change the baby. But then you break through that discomfort. And I have to say, like my daughter, like now that she's 8, she's such a great traveler. And I also tell her, I'm like, listen, because she'll start like bringing all this stuff and I'm like, you're gonna have to carry that, like I'm not carrying your stuff for you. So so now she's like very mindful of what she packs. Like she's like, okay, I have like one suitcase, like I know that my mom I was like, I have my suitcase, like I was like, in the Marines, we taught us you only pack what you could carry. Okay, so
So learn, kid. I love that you mentioned about introducing them to, different foods and giving them the space to say that they don't like something, but if they want to revisit it, that's okay too. And one thing I noticed when you were pregnant with your daughter, you traveled up until the time that you could not travel anymore when you were pregnant, which to me, that was some revolutionary shit, Jess, because I was like, she's still on a plane and she's expecting that. Can she do that? And yes, you can. And you
yeah,
did a post. I can't remember what platform, but you broke down how you travel safely while pregnant. You made sure that you had access to doctors. You made sure that you
yeah,
had all your medical things with you. So in case you had to go somewhere, everything was already laid out with information about your charts, et cetera, et cetera. And that was inspiring as hell. You just don't realize that because a lot of women, that's the claim. I'm going to say from a personal perspective, as a woman, when women enter that space of pregnancy, it's seen as so delicate that if you do anything outside of sitting at home and nesting and looking up baby clothes, you're looked at as a crazy lady in the street. Like if we invested more in travel and experiences than in things, I think we would be better off as a society in how we raise our children, whether we're part of the children's village or their core family unit. Because what I am noticing is, even though I've traveled later in my adult age, I didn't go on my first international trip till I was 21.
like I went to high school in Rochester, so I was like, that doesn't count. Going to
Exactly.
Canada, especially back in the day, like where you didn't need a passport to go, like
Yeah. And it's like, but I think for me, if my mom, we were in our household, it was me and mom, so we were like middle class on one salary. And back then, being raised as a kid in the 90s, there were no deals and offers essentially for families of
no,
two. It was always for
yeah,
families of four. So even then, just from an inclusivity standpoint, we were excluded from the conversation in
mhm,
terms of travel. So now that's why you see me on social traveling with my mom, because now there are a lot more options for us to travel as a family of two. And
yeah,
one thing I do want to do when my nieces get older is start traveling with them and bringing with me abroad so they can experience life outside of their American bubble. Because I want them to be similar to how you're raising your daughter, good people who have a wider cultural lens outside of what's being expressed to them through these social and digital channels. So I just want to share that with you. I really admire how you have introduced culture and food, and also tolerance through your content and through how you're raising your daughter in this global society. So claps to you, mom. Claps to
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
I think it was wild. Like, when I was pregnant, I traveled so much, because I was like, well, I don't know what it's going to be like with a baby. Am I going to be able to travel? So I was like, oh my God, I need to get all this content out before, because, at that time, yeah, I was already doing this full time. So I was like, okay, like, what can I kind of, and, I was still in the reserves in the Marine Corps. So I was in Japan working for 6 weeks with the Marines in uniform. So I was like shopping for baby clothes in Japan. The cutest things. But I love buying onesies. I'm like, nobody, like none of my friends have like babies. I was like, every time I see a onesie, I'm just like obsessed with them. But yeah, like I think that also we have to demystify, like this whole like, and I mean, and everybody's pregnancy is different. Like, I'll be honest, like, did I love being pregnant? No. But did I have a healthy pregnancy for the most part? Yes, like towards the end, I had a bit of high blood pressure. And I was almost 38 when I had my daughter. So,
Mm-hmm.
that was a factor too. But I do think I'm like, yeah, women, especially in the US, like we got to work until we get birth. So, it's not any different than going to the office or going to your place of employment.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, yeah, you get on a plane and having those conversations. I would always have, when I went with my appointments, I would, my doctor knew what I did for a living, and we had these conversations. And once my blood pressure started going up, like around 36, 30, because he was like, you could travel up to 30, I think it was like 36 weeks. And around 35 weeks, I started to get a little bit of high blood pressure. And he was like, yeah, I would, and I had a trip planned to Toronto, I remember. And he was like, I would feel more comfortable if you don't go on that trip. And I sat that one out towards the end. But I was going to events. Like the night before I gave birth, I was at an event in DC. And I remember like the PR girl almost looked at me in disgust, like, what is this pregnant chick doing here? Like it was what was it, at Mikado? Like I just remember she like looked at me like horror eyes, like, what is this big pregnant woman doing at this party? Like I was like, well, y'all invited me.
And the baby's
um,
hungry.
yep. I was looking fabulous too. Um, but and also it's interesting because when talking again about traveling and discomfort and raising also a daughter in a city, and Brussels is interesting because it's a city that has 180 nationalities represented in the city, so it is so international. You hear a bazillion languages. Like today at dinner we were having this conversation about Christmas, and like and it does have, like, I would say a big group of immigrants come from Northern Africa, and they're Muslim. And
Mm-hmm.
we were having this conversation, we're like, not everybody celebrates Christmas, and she was like, oh, what are their celebrations? So I was like, well, they have Ramadan, and at the end they have the Eid, which is like, almost kind of like, not like Christmas, but I mean the
Mm-hmm.
level of celebration is similar too. So I think it's like, you see different people, and it also sparks a conversation, right? Like, why does that person say that? Or why does that person not celebrate this? So I like having those conversations, with her. And she's also super curious. So she'll, like, for example, like, why do some people don't celebrate Christmas? And you're like, oh, okay, here we go. um but at the same time, or sometimes, like, she'll challenge me, and I'm like, oh my, I don't know that, like, let me figure out how, like, this came to be, or
How to
but
answer
it's,
all these questions.
yeah, yeah, thank God for Google. I don't know what parents were doing back in the day. Like, my mom was just probably like lying to me. Like,
Yeah, that's essentially what they did. They made up a lot of stuff, which
yes.
thinking about it. But in changing gears a bit, if we go back to your impact as a food blogger and a content creator, I know we talked about this a little bit earlier in the interview, but what is your thoughts about how content creators and food bloggers have played a role in shaping travel and dining trends? Because a lot of times, Jess, we wouldn't know where to eat or what to do or where to go without the impact of food bloggers and content creators. So share a bit of your thoughts around that. What are your ideas?
So I think that for me, social media has been revolutionary in a way that it democratized food media, and since we can get a little spicy today, for example, Eater just released this like hate story. I don't know if you saw, like, Meghan Markle has like a new cooking show right on Netflix, and
Yeah.
she's and this woman. Um, um, wrote an article like, I saw like Meghan Markle's trailer and I'm bored already, and Eater obviously is a big, big food publication. And and I have to say I was a bit disappointed because Eater DC does some great stories. But this was like came from Eater, um, and
Global.
but then you have this monopoly that food media has. It's very clicky, and they only write about the chefs that they like, and um, they kind of like nitpick and choose, obviously, and it comes from a certain lens. I think it's now starting to diversify a bit more, but it's still also still very, I would say, still very white, like that food media world. And what I think that content creation has done is, people, you can pick who you want to follow, right? Like, I mean, people like my stuff, some people don't like my stuff, so they don't follow me or they're not interested. Same for me. Like, there's some creators that I follow and I love their stuff, and I feel like, oh, that person is recommending this, like, I can, I'll take her word for it, or I'll take their
Mhm.
his word for it, or whatever. So I think that it's really opened, and what experiences, right, like what makes an experience. And for me, like, in terms of, like, from a business perspective, I can compete with like the big, like, let's say I write a review of 10 things to do in New York City, like that is going to be like in page 100 of Google. So from a business perspective, and also from my own interest, like, one of the things that I've been starting to do is writing about smaller destinations. Like,
Mm.
I wrote an article about Kobe, Japan, that's like almost 10 years old, and that still gets hits on my website because everybody's talk. Yeah, and I love Kobe. Like, we had an amazing time there. But because everybody talks about Tokyo or Kyoto, but nobody is writing about Kobe, or even Belgium and Brussels. North is an amazing city called Antwerp. And I did it, like, actually one of my friends wrote a food guide that's like, I need to update it because it's all but that still gets hits on the site. So from a personal and business perspective, I think that being your own publisher, you kind of get to choose, you get to choose what you want to write about.
Mhm.
And if you have an audience, I've been very fortunate that, super excited, because I mean, I've been blogging for 15 years, but Dining Traveler, like, as the Dining Traveler, this is our 10th year. So yeah, and I just had like that, when you're like on the grind and you're not really thinking of things. And then I think it was like the day before yesterday, I was like, holy shit, like, we've been around for 10 years, like, as the Dining Traveler. And you see a lot of people come and go. but and you also evolve. And I think that for me, like, what I find right now in the food world very interesting, and I also see this in Belgium quite a bit, is the effect that immigrants have in the food landscape. And I think that that doesn't really get talked about as much. Like, I mean, in DC, you have immigrants from Latin America, from Africa, from like the
El
big Ethiopian
Salvador. Mhm.
yeah, like the big Ethiopian community. You have people from Asia, like, and that is what makes that food culture rich. And Same thing, here in Belgium is, yes, and also you have other Europeans, like you can get some great Italian food here, some great Greek food. That's something that for me this year, I want to interview more immigrant chefs and business owners, and talk about their contribution to the local food landscape.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the impact of immigrant culture because without diving too much into it, we know a new administration is about to enter the White House. And we're not going to bring down the vibe of this interview, but we know a lot of the policies that they're trying to push forward are going to impact immigrants in this country. And also, people don't realize the US is a world stage, right? A lot of people, when they see what we're doing here in the US, it is emulated in other countries in
Yes.
terms of what they choose to do. So I think people forget they watch our elections strategically to see how we're going to move. I appreciate you saying that because as someone who grew up with a diverse background and understands the impact of immigrants in this country, it just makes me so sad for people to think that their favorite foods or their favorite restaurant that they go to, that that's not part of the American thread of the bigger blanket of who we are as a culture. And taking that away essentially takes away the overall American experience, which is diversity, which is inclusion in the food and cultural
And
space.
it's interesting that you say, like, how other countries, tend to emulate. And one thing that, like, living abroad, living especially like in Belgium, has taught me that, I think that obviously the States has a long way to go, but I think that also we, especially as women of color, have some privileges that even here women of color don't have, especially those that come from, because even if like you're a Hispanic or Black person that is a US citizen, like we're still in a, like they don't see us, obviously they see us. It's interesting because sometimes I get treated a certain way and then I open my mouth and they're like,
Hmm.
oh, she's okay, she's American. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like there's this um
Oh, I know
then
what you're
somebody.
talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think it's a bit dangerous. Like sometimes when you see content creators and they're like, "Oh, I feel safer here than I do in the States as as a Black person, as a Hispanic person." But we also need to have those conversations. Like when I speak to people, like there's a big Congolese population here, and I've spoken to folks that come from that background, and the way they're treated are people like Moroccans or people that come from those different backgrounds and how they're treated. It's very different than me being a brown person but opening my mouth, and obviously they hear my accent and they know I'm a US citizen.
Yeah. And you're actually right because I did read a think piece about that, about how there's a thought process that Black Americans or people of color coming from America to visit Europe, they already hold us at a higher esteem because it took money for us to get over to their
Yeah.
country. So they're like, oh, you already have means to be here. Let me treat you differently than I would someone who is an immigrant from like a North African country or just an African country in general, or another Latin American country who has moved abroad. Um, moving things ahead though, I know when you're working as a foodie and a content creator, we need a new title for that, Jess, because I don't feel like that explains what you do enough.
I do use a food and travel publisher, like that's what I've been using
I think that's
lately,
better.
like food and travel content publisher.
Yes, I think that's a lot better because I just don't like blogger for certain people who are really about their shit, like, and you are. Um,
Thank you.
but you're welcome,
And I
Jess.
have to say, and not to toot our own horn, but because I think that blogs come from a place, a lot of it is, personal opinion, and and I say we because it's me, but there's an amazing writer that's based in DC, Priya, that writes for me, and she does the DC angle, and she's comes from an Indian American background, and but we interview people, we research, even when she sends me articles, and I know she knows because, she's also written for City Paper, she writes for Northern Virginia Magazine, but I still like, fact check, make sure that, what we put out there is factual. And also like that the stuff that we're putting out there is stuff that we've experienced. And that's what I tell people, like, that's kind of like our unique, value perspective, or is that we these are experiences that we write from a firsthand experience. It's not like, oh, I heard it from so and so,
Mhm.
or whoever. So that for me, that is the differentiation factor.
Yeah.
Obviously I can't compete with like a Far or Travel and Leisure, like, because they have staffs of people.
You
But
don't have to. You're Jess.
yes, but you know what I'm saying, like, as a publisher,
Oh, I know.
but then, sometimes I see some of the stuff, like, for example, we can use that article that just came out of Eater as an example of, as a publisher, should you be doing those kind of articles? And I even have it on my about page on my website. It's like that everything might look like rainbows and unicorns on my website, but you're a publisher too. Like, it takes hours to create a piece of content. Like, even writing a simple blog post will take me probably 4 to 5 hours, like SEO, optimization, fact checking, grammar, like editing, copy editing. So I'm like, am I going to spend that much time just to talk shit about somebody? I just don't have the time. When
No.
like when I can talk about a chef that is doing some amazing things, or a hotel owner that is risking everything to put out like a beautiful property, like that's what I can use my 5 hours, instead of like using it to trash somebody.
Hmm. And I agree with you on that because there is responsibility on these platforms. And I think, especially as the social space has expanded, it's kind of becoming lost in terms of how people choose to be responsible with how they're using their platforms. People, in my opinion, are looking more for viral moments instead of viral moments of impact. They're looking to
Yeah.
start discourse instead of real conversations. And then you have people like me and you who are being thoughtful about what we're putting out there and understanding that every time we speak or choose to share our opinion, no matter how large or small the views for the video are, people are still seeing that content, right? And that will still have an impact on what people take away from that topic or that subject, and more importantly, how they view us as individuals on these content platforms.
And I love that you say, because I just posted something on LinkedIn today, about, yesterday I was at one of my friends from grad school. He invited me over for dinner. He was just telling us like, hey, I wanted to do this alumni event, and only 8 people signed up, so I canceled it. And he had a speaker lined up, and the speaker was pissed off at him. I was like, yes, I would have been pissed off at you too, but but I told him, I was like, but those 8 people were probably looking forward to that event. They probably could have taken something. He just wanted to do it to kind of network. But the way I see it, like, even in social media, like, some people are like, oh, like, only 100 people saw this, but I'm like, you never know who's watching. So I don't know if you know Kaylani. She's based in Philly. She's the editor of the food editor of Philadelphia Philly magazine. But she's like also like an OG like us, and she started like this like YouTube channel talking about like weird food history stuff. Like, she's kind of a bit, food nerd, and and then somebody reached out to her, and then she got a show on their local PBS station, like, talking about food history. Like, and it was literally a producer reached out to her based on her YouTube channel. And it wasn't like she had thousands of subscribers. Like, I guess somebody was searching for this. There was a show called Check Please, and I remember somebody found me through YouTube, and this is not even when I was like pushing a lot of videos out. And they called me I didn't get the job, but they called me for an interview. I ended up being, brought in as a guest, got some TV time out of it. So again, you just never know who's watching. And I think that for me, like, I always tell people, um, one of my friends, George Torres, like, he's like an OG like Puerto Rican blogger. Like, he's like had his blog, like, what was that mijente.com, and then there was other black space, was it black space,
Yeah,
talking
Black
about
Planet. Black
Black
Planet.
Planet, Black,
Yes.
yeah. And then the Hispanic version was like mijente.com. um But it was always kind of like, like, because there's like a lot of New York people I find like in that website. But he's like one of the OG guys, but he still does like a lot of social strategy. And he was like, a lot of people want 100,000 followers, but they're not taking care of their 100 followers. And I think that that is, so important when you're like, when I think of like dining traveler and what I want to do, and of course, like, obviously the bigger the reach, the more money you're going to make. Like, I mean, this is also a
Hmm.
business. I'm not doing this for fun. I have to feed my family with this. But at the same time, it's like, okay, like, can I have an impact with 15,000 followers? Absolutely. Can I show this body of work to an editor, and write for a big publication based on, this body of work that I've created? And a lot of the opportunities that I have now were because I self-published, because nobody was giving me these jobs. Like, nobody was hiring a Puerto Rican girl from upstate New York to write stories about food and travel because, ooh, like, what does she know? So it wasn't until I started publishing my own stories and pitching to people and being like, hey, these are my links. Then I did my self-published my book that I basically spent my life savings on, to publish and make it come to life. So, I just think that we we have to think when you're creating content, when you're creating, stories, like, why are you doing this? And I always tell people, like, what is your why? Like, if you're trying, and even like if you're chasing that viral moment, like, what are you going to get out of it? You're also going to get a lot of trolls. You're also going to get a lot of negative, energy. Or like, the bigger the platform is, like, the more of, not everybody is going to be on your same page. So these are all like factors that folks have to consider, in terms of, where do you want to be? And for me this year, I know that I want to kind of go back to my roots that I had in DC of like building community and doing in person. Like, I'm an in person person. Like, it's interesting because sometimes, like, I'll follow somebody online and I love their personality online, and then I meet them in person and they're like super awkward. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, it
Um,
has.
and then you're like, hey girl, like, and they're like, 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 who is this crazy woman? Like, but I'm like, you're so outgoing online. In my head, I'm saying that. And for me, I feel like I'm a bit more reserved online, but then in person, I'm, like, I'm an in-person person, and
Hmm.
so for me, like, that is one of the directions that I want to do more of this year. Is like more. I started a supper club in Brussels, building more community, cooking classes, panel discussions. I think I probably did the first like Hispanic Heritage Month event in Brussels, period, like earlier this last Hispanic Heritage Month. And I had so many people coming up to me. It's like, oh, it's so refreshing, to have these conversations. So again, it's going back to, what is, your why, like, and obviously I'm making business decisions that align to that.
Hmm. And you mentioned about pitching, and as someone who I've written many a cold email pitching myself to different brands, have you found success in cold pitching, Jess, or is it better to focus on, networking and referrals?
I think both, to be honest, because sometimes I'm shocked of the stuff that I gotten from cold pitching. I kid you not. Like, I'm like, what? Like, okay, let's, because you're not expecting like that somebody would even reply to you, and you're like, oh, okay.
Like, thank you.
And I and I think that for me, one of the things I always recommend to people, like, use LinkedIn, because everybody's sliding in people's DMs on Instagram, maybe TikTok, but um like LinkedIn, like, get that premium membership, and you can just reach so many people that you would not be able to reach. You can cut through a lot of that noise, and they know that you're a serious person, like, when you're using LinkedIn. But and also, one thing that I noticed, and I was doing entrepreneurship workshops with an organization called Bunker Labs, for veterans. And I would tell people, I'm like, when you pitch, like, because I used to do this back in the day, I would send something and never hear anything back. And then as I started to grow, like people would pitch me things, and then I would get so busy or I would get so many emails that I would forget. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a great story idea, but then I would forget about it, or I would get. So I always tell people, I'm like, use the rules of three. And if you want something really bad, keep on emailing until that person tells you stop emailing me. Like, and I put a little reminder. So like every 2 weeks, I'm like, hey, I just want to, get, I'm back on the top of your email. I have a little spreadsheet that I'm like, okay, I pitched on this date, that date. But I think I think it's important to, because how else are you going to meet these people? If you're not, if you're not pitching, obviously conferences are really important, especially in the food and travel space, going to conferences. I think that and not only like, networking with people with decisions, whether they're editors or PR people, but also networking within your peers, because I've referred a lot of people work, and vice versa. And sometimes like I'll get an editor's alert, oh, I'm looking for a story in X, Y, and Z, and then somebody, I'm like, oh, I can't do it, but let me just forward it to somebody that I know that they've been to that destination. So
Mm.
it goes also, peers and decision makers, and just being able to have kind of your tribe in your industry where you help each other out.
And that's so smart because I think Issa Rae, one of my favorite creators who literally started from the bottom,
Yeah.
now we're here, mentioned that
She started as a
during
blogger.
she really did. Like she
Yeah,
legit is an example of resilience in the content creative space and building your own path. I just love her. Her and also just Kev on stage. I don't know if you know of him. He's
I love
a
him,
uh,
love him.
yeah, okay. Love him, love his wife. I love everybody in the
Yeah.
family. Um, she mentioned during an interview that people make the mistake all the time of just wanting to go beeline to the directors and CMOs, etc., instead of networking across, right? Instead of skipping over the assistant, connect with the assistant, connect with the coordinator, the junior manager, whomever, because they're in
Mhm.
that position today. They won't be there tomorrow. But if you're building a real community, those same people who are starting out on the ground just like you are going to be your network of people when they get up to their level, will remember you when those opportunities come about. So I always keep that in mind because I think about how like me and you have evolved in our professional spaces, and when in my creative circle, I'm always trying to think of ways to work people into projects that I'm working on in my full-time role to get them additional monetary compensation for their work and get them fair pay for what they should be
Yeah.
doing. A lot of times, Jess, and I hope my SVP is not listening to this, but when it comes time for a contract and I'm like, hey, what's your rate? They're like, this much. I'm like, okay. And they're like, I got an email and it said this much. Is that a mistake? No. And they're like,
Hmm.
who told them to pay me that much? I did. I said your rate was this. I added an extra 30 to 40% to what your rate was
Yeah.
because you were undervaluing yourself. So essentially just me being in the positions that I have been in, I always look to protect my fellow creative of color because a lot of times we are just happy to be in the room. And when we're happy to be
Yes.
in the room, sometimes we just take any offer and we're not negotiating properly. And we're doing a lot more work than the content creator who is getting paid 10 plus 20,000 for the same work that we're doing to get paid only two. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I tell people, I'm like, give yourself a number and don't deviate from that number. So if somebody says, oh, there's X, Y, and Z, and we're going to, we're only offering this amount, I'm just be like, no, no, thank you. And amazingly, like 50% of the time people will come back and be like, oh, okay, like we found the other budget and we'll pay you that. Or if they're like, no, we can't do it, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, if your rate goes up, like, let me know. And I feel, because before, like in the beginning, I would take whatever I could get, because again, it's a business, you're starting off. But I also make space, for some pro bono work. And amazingly, it has led me to paid opportunities. Obviously, I call it kind of like, how people like tithe in church. Like that's my version of it. Like from a maybe I'll do a speaking engagement for free for for an organization that lines up with my values, or I'll do I don't know, a workshop, or I'll do like a post for, a company that I already believe in. Like, I'm not going to do it for a big corporate, but like, let's say, I know somebody that owns a restaurant and they're like, hey, can you really help me out with this? I'll be like, sure, I'll help you out. Like, I always try to like wiggle in some pro bono, work, to kind of just like pay it forward. And again, like you were saying, you just never know where people are. Where people are going to end up, and again, I love these human connections, not because, yeah, it's great to network, it's great to know people or whatever, but at the same time, like, I've seen so many people grow that like started with me and have like surpassed, where I'm at, but I still have that connection with that person. But it's so cool to watch. And that's, you just don't know where people are going to end up, and I think that that's why, kindness and being respectful, to other people, it's really important.
And I think that's a great way for us to end the interview, because you've given so much great insight about your work, about, insights for those who are looking to get into the creative space and things like that. And I really do appreciate your time. Now, before we end the actual show, I do have some quick fire questions for you, if you are down.
Yes, of
Are you
course.
down for that? Okay, great. All right.
Yeah.
So these are top of the dome. It does not have to be a perfect answer. It's just what you think of when it comes to your mind first. Okay. In your opinion, Jess, who is the best rapper or singer of all time?
For me, in Spanish, Mark Anthony. And just a rapper, because it just reminds me of my youth, Little Kim. Like, I was listening to her the other day and I'm like, yes, Little Kim had to walk so Cardi could fly,
So make it run. The Little Kim days were a time on the
Yes.
internet. But she still is that girl. Like, people still to this
She's still
day
that
know
girl,
this means Little Kim.
Yeah. Pity of all the surgery, but she was that girl. Like, nobody could touch her back in the day.
No one could touch her at all. Okay, so another question. You just discovered you have magic powers. What powers do you have?
Speaking any language in the world.
Oh, I like that one. You know what, Jess? That is the best answer I have heard. Finally, Jess, if you were a coffee, what kind of coffee would you be?
A cappuccino, strong yet frothy.
I like that. And it's also cappuccino is also considered one of those international coffee drinks. So no matter where you
Yeah.
are, you'll be fancy with the cup and
Yeah,
all the
because
things.
it's like a shot of espresso, so it's still strong, but then you add milk, to kind of soften it a bit. And I feel like there's a part of me that's, can be very strong, very, but then there's a frothy side. So, yeah, cappuccino.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Jess, for joining me for coffee. I really appreciate it. I know my mom's gonna love this
Oh,
episode
tell
because you're one of her favorite content creators. And I am so serious. I'm gonna call her after we finish to put a bug in her ear. Mom, we might be going to Brussels this year. Like,
Yes,
let's
yes.
just I
I would
just need
love
to
to see
come.
you here.
Coffee with Yvonne is produced and edited by Yvonne Pearson. Coffee with Yvonne is created by Pink Dollhouse Marketing. You can catch the latest episodes by subscribing to Apple Podcasts